5 days before my sister's wedding, I stood in my kitchen holding a coffee cup that had already gone cold. The morning sunlight stretched across the counter, touching the invitation resting beside my keys. It was a beautiful card, covered in gold, lettering and elegant details that represented everything my family valued: wealth, tradition, and appearances. I had spent weeks preparing for the ceremony, choosing a dress, arranging travel, and convincing myself that maybe this time would be different. Maybe my mother would finally look at me and see a daughter instead of a disappointment. Then my phone rang. The name on the screen made my heart tighten. Mom. I answered with a smile I no longer felt. Hi, Mom. There was silence on the other end. Not a normal pause. A heavy silence filled with something I couldn't understand. Listen, she finally said, her voice unusually quiet. You shouldn't come to the wedding. For a moment, I thought I misunderstood her. What do you mean? I asked. She exhaled slowly. There will be important people there. Family, friends, your sister's future in-laws, people who know how things work. The words hurt more than I expected. Not because they were cruel, but because they sounded familiar. I had spent my whole life feeling like the wrong piece in a perfect family portrait. Then she said the sentence that broke something inside me. It would be better for everyone if you stayed away. I looked at the wedding invitation again, wondering how a simple piece of paper could suddenly feel so heavy. But there was something different in her voice. She wasn't just embarrassed. She sounded afraid. Mom, what is really going on? Another silence. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, she whispered before ending the call. I stood there alone, listening to the empty sound of the disconnected phone. For years, I had accepted being overlooked. I had accepted being the daughter who never matched a family's image. But this felt different. Someone was hiding something. Before I could process what happened, my phone vibrated again. A message appeared from an unknown number. I opened it slowly. The first line stopped me cold. Your mother doesn't want you at this wedding because she knows what I found. I stared at that message for several minutes, unable to move. But before I could understand who had sent it, my mind drifted back to the years that brought me here. Growing up, I learned very early that families could have favorites without ever saying the words out loud. My sister, Claire, was the daughter everyone celebrated. She had the perfect smile, the perfect manners, and the perfect future everyone imagined for her. My parents displayed her achievements like trophies. Every award, every photograph, every accomplishment became another reason for them to remind the world that our family was still respected. I was different. I was the daughter who asked questions, the daughter who noticed things people wanted ignored, while Claire learned how to walk through expensive parties and charm wealthy guests. I learned how to stand on my own. When I left home, I didn't have family connections waiting for me. I didn't have a trust fund, a powerful introduction, or a safety net hidden behind my name. I worked long hours, paid my own bills, and built a life from nothing. My apartment was small. My car was old. My clothes weren't designer, but everything I had was mine. For years, I believed my parents looked down on me because I didn't fit into their world of country clubs, private events, and carefully planned appearances. They valued the image of a perfect family more than the people inside it. But there was always one thing that bothered me. Whenever conversations turned toward my grandfather, my parents changed. The confidence disappeared. The smiles faded. Questions about old family documents, inheritance, or the past were quickly shut down. Some things are better left alone, my mother would always say. I never understood why. My grandfather had been a respected man, someone whose name carried weight in our community. But after his death, certain stories seemed to vanish. Documents disappeared. Family conversations ended before they began. And every time I asked why, my parents acted like I was opening a door that should never be touched. Now, 5 days before Claire's wedding, that same fear was back in my mother's voice. I looked again at the unknown message. Your mother doesn't want you at this wedding because she knows what I found. My fingers hovered over the screen as I typed a reply. Who is this? The response came almost instantly. I'm sorry I didn't contact you sooner. My name is Daniel. My heart stopped. Daniel was Claire's fiancé, the man my family had spent months preparing to welcome into their world. Then another message appeared. I found something about your family that changes everything, and I think you're the only person who can help me uncover the truth. I read Daniel's message 3 times before I could convince myself it was real. My sister's future husband, the man everyone in my family described as the perfect addition to our legacy, was secretly reaching out to me because he believed my family had hidden something from him. I didn't know whether to trust him. After all, my entire life, I had been the outsider, the person who wasn't invited into important conversations, the person who was always told she didn't understand how things worked. Why would Daniel suddenly believe I was the one person who could help him? A few seconds later, another message appeared. I know this sounds strange, but please meet me somewhere private. I need to show you something. Attached was a photograph. I opened it carefully. The image showed a set of old documents spread across a wooden desk. The paper looked aged, the edges slightly worn. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I noticed the names. My grandfather's name was written clearly across the top. My breathing slowed. Daniel explained that while preparing wedding paperwork, he had been given access to some family records. He had found an old locked drawer inside a desk that belonged to my grandfather. Inside was a collection of legal documents that appeared to have been hidden for years. One document was a copy of an old will, but something was wrong. A name written on the page didn't match the story my family had repeated for years. Daniel sent another message. I thought maybe there was a mistake, but then I found more. I looked closer at the photograph, searching for an answer that wasn't there. Why are you showing me this? I finally typed. His reply came slowly. Because your family has been telling everyone one version of the story, but these documents tell another. I felt a cold feeling settle in my chest. Suddenly, my mother's phone call sounded different. She hadn't been worried about wealthy guests judging me. She hadn't been afraid I would embarrass the family. She was afraid I would discover something. Then Daniel sent one final message. Can I ask you something? I waited. Did anyone ever tell you why your grandfather changed his will? I stared at the screen. The answer should have been simple, but it wasn't, because no one had ever told me he changed it. Not my mother, not my father, not Claire. Nobody. For the first time in years, I realized the silence around my family's past wasn't accidental. Someone had worked very hard to keep me away from the truth. And now, 5 days before the wedding, that truth had finally started looking for me. I met Daniel the next morning at a quiet cafe far away from the places my family usually visited. No country club conversations. No carefully dressed relatives pretending everything was perfect. Just two people sitting across from each other, surrounded by strangers who had no idea that a family's entire reputation was beginning to crack. Daniel placed a folder on the table. I didn't want to believe it, he said, but the more I looked, the more I realized someone wanted these documents forgotten. Inside were copies of old records, property papers, and handwritten notes from my grandfather. None of it gave me the complete answer, but every page revealed another question. Why were these documents hidden? Why did my mother never mention them? And why did my family spend years protecting a story that might not have been true? I started searching quietly. The first person I contacted was my grandfather's old assistant, Margaret. I hadn't seen her in almost a decade. She lived in a small house outside town and looked surprised when she opened the door. I wondered if this day would come, she said. Those words immediately made me nervous. Over tea in her kitchen, Margaret told me things I had never heard before. She said my grandfather had spent his final months making changes to his estate plans. He had meetings behind closed doors. He had arguments with my parents. And after his death, several important files disappeared. Your grandfather trusted very few people, Margaret whispered. But he always said one thing. The truth should belong to the person brave enough to find it. I felt a strange weight in my chest. For years, I thought I was the forgotten daughter, but maybe I had been kept away because someone was afraid of what I would uncover. As the days passed, I followed every clue I could find. Old financial records showed unusual transfers. Family properties had been rearranged. Certain accounts were moved shortly after my grandfather passed away. The perfect family image I grew up seeing started to look like a carefully built illusion. Then my mother called again. You need to stop, she said. Her voice wasn't angry this time. It was desperate. Mom, what are you hiding? A long silence followed. You don't understand what you're doing. Then explain it to me. She didn't answer. Instead, She lowered her voice and said, "If you come to that wedding, you won't just ruin Claire's day. You could destroy everything." The call ended, and for the first time, I wondered if the wedding was never about celebrating a new beginning. Maybe it was about protecting an old secret before it finally came out. The closer we got to the wedding day, the harder it became for my family to pretend everything was normal. From the outside, Claire's wedding still looked like a dream. The venue was decorated with flowers flown in from another state. Guests were arriving with expensive gifts. Every photograph showed smiling faces and perfect clothing. But behind those polished walls, everything was falling apart. Daniel continued searching through the documents he had found. Each discovery made him more uncomfortable. "There are too many things that don't add up," he told me during another private conversation. He showed me records connected to my grandfather's estate. Some assets had been transferred years earlier than expected. Some decisions had been made without the approval of people who were supposed to have a voice. And one name kept appearing. Mine. I stared at the documents, confused. Why would my name be here? Daniel looked at me carefully. "That's what I can't understand. It seems like someone made sure you never knew." The daughter everyone ignored had been connected to something far more important than anyone admitted. Meanwhile, Claire started acting differently. The confident sister who always seemed to have control was suddenly nervous. She avoided certain conversations. She stopped answering simple questions about family history. When Daniel asked about documents from my grandfather, she became defensive. That was when the whispers started. Relatives who had spent years protecting our family's image began quietly questioning each other. Old stories were being compared. Memories that had been buried started coming back. People were realizing that the perfect family they admired might have been built on missing pieces. Then I found the most disturbing clue. My grandfather's wealth wasn't just about money. It was about a decision that affected someone's entire future. Someone had been pushed aside. Someone had lost an opportunity that should have belonged to them. And according to the records, my family had benefited from that silence. I sat alone that night, looking through copies of documents spread across my table. For years, I believed I was the one who had been rejected, the one who wasn't valuable enough. But now I was starting to see something different. Maybe I wasn't excluded because I had less. Maybe I was excluded because I had the ability to expose everything. Then my phone rang. It was my mother. I almost didn't answer. But when I did, I heard fear in her voice. "They're asking questions now," she whispered. "Who is?" Another pause. "People who shouldn't know." The line went silent, and I realized the secret we were chasing was no longer hidden. It was fighting to survive. The truth did not arrive like a dramatic confession. It came quietly. It came in the form of a sealed envelope hidden inside an old storage box that Margaret had kept for decades. "I promised your grandfather I would only give this to you when the right person came looking," she said. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were documents that changed everything. There was a certified copy of my grandfather's final will. There were signed statements from attorneys. There were records proving that changes had been made shortly before his death. And there, written clearly in black and white, was the truth my family had spent years hiding. My grandfather had never intended for Claire to inherit everything. He had never intended for me to be forgotten. In his final wishes, he had divided his legacy differently than everyone believed. He wanted both of his granddaughters to receive opportunities, but he specifically trusted me with something he considered priceless: the responsibility to protect the family's values, not just its wealth. I read the words again and again. The daughter they ignored had been the one my grandfather believed could handle the truth. But someone had made sure I never saw it. The evidence pointed back to my mother. Years earlier, after my grandfather passed away, she had worked with others to keep the updated documents hidden. She changed the family story, convinced relatives that Claire was the rightful future of the family, and protected the image of perfection they cared about more than honesty. The morning of Claire's wedding arrived with the same elegance everyone expected. Luxury cars lined the entrance. Guests stepped out wearing designer clothes. Cameras captured every perfect detail. From the outside, it looked like nothing could touch my family's carefully created world. But this time, I wasn't watching from the outside. I was standing there with the truth. I met Daniel privately before the ceremony began. I handed him the final documents and watched as he read every page. His expression changed slowly, from confusion to disbelief. and finally to disappointment. "I need to know one thing," he said. "Did Claire know?" I looked down at the papers. "I don't know." And that was the hardest part. Because the truth wasn't just about money or inheritance. It was about trust. Daniel walked toward the room where Claire and my parents were preparing. I followed behind him. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed to stop hiding. For the first time, I was no longer the daughter standing quietly in the corner. I was the person holding the answers. When Daniel placed the documents on the table, the room became silent. Claire looked at the papers, then at my mother, and I saw it. Fear, not surprise. Fear. That told me more than any confession could. My mother tried to explain. She talked about protecting the family, preserving their reputation, and making sure Claire had the future she deserved. But every excuse revealed another layer of the truth. Family members who had arrived, expecting a beautiful celebration, were now hearing the story they had never been told. The perfect image began collapsing piece by piece. Some relatives defended my mother. Others questioned why they had been lied to for so long. Claire sat quietly, realizing that the future she had been promised was built on secrets she never fully understood. The wedding that was supposed to prove my family's success became the day their hidden history was finally exposed. I watched my mother look at me across the room. For years, she had believed I was the weakest person in the family, the daughter without power, the daughter who could be ignored. But she was wrong. The person they pushed away was the one person who could bring the truth back. And now everyone had to decide what mattered more: the appearance of a perfect family, or the truth they had spent decades trying to bury. In the weeks that followed, my family's world changed completely. There were legal conversations, difficult decisions, and painful truths that could no longer be ignored. The documents my grandfather left behind were finally recognized, and the story my family had protected for so long was replaced by the reality they tried to hide. But the biggest change wasn't financial. It was personal. For years, I believed I needed my mother's approval. I thought if I worked harder, achieved more, or became someone impressive enough, maybe she would finally see me the way she saw Claire. I was wrong. The truth gave me something far more valuable than acceptance. It gave me freedom. I stopped measuring my worth by the place I had at my family's table. I stopped wondering why I was never chosen. I finally understood that being pushed aside had forced me to build something they could never take away from me. My own strength, my own identity, my own life. Claire and I never returned to the relationship we had before. Some wounds don't disappear just because the truth comes out. But for the first time, we both had the chance to see our family without the illusions that had controlled us. As for my mother, I don't think she ever truly understood what she lost. She spent years protecting a reputation. She protected money, status, and appearances. But in doing so, she damaged the very relationships that made a family meaningful. My grandfather's true legacy was never the wealth he left behind. It was the belief that honesty mattered more than image, that character mattered more than status, and that truth, no matter how long it stays buried, eventually finds its way into the light. 5 days before my sister's wedding, I thought my mother had taken something from me: my place in the family, my sense of belonging, my hope that things could be different. But she gave me something I never expected: the chance to finally choose myself. And sometimes the greatest revenge isn't watching someone lose everything. It's realizing you no longer need anything from them at all.